Good evening. Well, it's 6 o'clock and we are live. I think Callum was supposed to maybe do some kind of introduction, but you know what? Forget it. I'm here now. I'm just opening up Facebook on another thing so I can see any comments that might come in and things. So I can check that. My name is Pete Morgan. I have been involved in radio for 30 years, 31 years now. I started when I was 15 and I've worked on national radio, did some work on 5 Live, I've worked on regional radio, produced Ed James at Breakfast in the West Midlands for just under 6 years. I've presented locally, regionally and nationally, as I say, presented in North Wales, presented in Brighton, Bournemouth, and then Manchester for a little bit, and then settled in Birmingham in 2001. I actually came to Birmingham, came to the West Midlands as a producer. I was producing the breakfast show on Galaxy, Dave Clark at Breakfast. I produced that for, it was only a few months because then Ed James arrived on Heart and I got the job. I think Callum's with us. I'm here. Sorry, the iPhone died. Don't worry about it. It's technology. That's the way it works. So I started when I was 15. I was coming towards the end of my time in secondary school, and there'd been lots of talk about what your future career was going to be. And the only thing I knew was that I wanted it to be in music in some way. So we looked at the possibility of me being like a sound producer, like a studio producer. And for that, I would have needed physics at both A-level and degree level. And at the time, I didn't know about this idea of just gaining experience and kind of knowing the right people and working your way through we worked purely on a qualification route. And I tried physics, tried it at secondary school, and I tried it again at college and just hated it. Just couldn't get on. But now I love it. But at the time when I was kind of 15, no, couldn't be doing with it. Absolutely drove me spare. So I gave up on it and decided that I still wanted to work in music in some way. And it was my mum who said, listen, someone came in the shop. My mum and dad were shop owners for years. Someone came in the shop and said that they do some work at hospital radio. Wythenshawe Hospital. Do you want me to find out more? Absolutely, let's try that. And that's where it started. So that would have been 1987, about that, 87, 88, when I started at FAB Radio was the name of the radio station at Wythenshawe Hospital. FAB were the 3 wards that we broadcast to, and we were based, the station was tucked way out of the way. We were in the same building as the morgue. That's where we were, FAB Radio. And I went in to have a look, and then I just kind of went in on a regular basis. And within a couple of weeks, I was doing a Friday night show and a Saturday night show. So Friday nights 9 till 10, Saturday nights 9 until 10. And that was as far as the structure went. It was, play whatever you want, nothing too poppy, nothing too modern, but really just play whatever you want. So I did. I met 2 guys there who became firm friends. One is a guy called Darren, who works in imports and exports in Manchester, and the other one was this taxi driver's son with a quiff, and we immediately got on. And it was Carl, well, his name was Carl Pilkington. It still is Carl Pilkington. And of course, he's gone on to huge things with Ricky Gervais and Stephen Merchant. He's got his own sitcom coming up on Channel 4. No, it's coming up on Sky in the next few weeks. And myself and Darren and Carl just fell in love. This is where the love affair with radio started. We just started being obsessed with radio. Listened to Key 103 and Piccadilly Gold, which were my local stations in Manchester at the time, and just started wanting to do everything, wanting to have the great jam jingles, wanting to be able to present like Steve Penk did, who was, I mean, at the time, if I remember rightly, he did the mid-morning show on Key 103. But for us, he was the biggest thing on the station, and we absolutely adored it. So, so did hospital radio for, I think it was about 3 years. I did FAB. And then I got the chance to go in and help out. I'd done some helping out, answering phones at Piccadilly Radio, which, growing up in Manchester, that was the heritage station. So in Birmingham, it was BRMB. In Liverpool, it was City. In London, it was Capital. In Manchester, it was Piccadilly. And I got the chance to go in and answer some phones to a lovely guy called Jeff George, who did the overnight show from Saturday into Sunday, or the late night show from Saturday into Sunday. And we answered the phones for him. There wasn't very many phone calls, but that's what we did, and we enjoyed it. And then I heard about the show called The Funster Show, the late night Funster Show. It was on Piccadilly, and two of my very good friends, Lisa and Marion, who I'd also met at Wythenshawe Hospital, they were helping out this presenter called Paul Carrington, who did this program like the Beano on the radio. So it was sketches and characters and a real zoo format. There seemed to be about 10 people in at any one time on the show. You can hear them all. And they all had names. They were all so Loopy Lisa and Mad Maz and the Professor and Dirty Gertie and all that. And Paul left Piccadilly and got a job with Signal. And I started going in. And genuinely, I was not the one at school who was, voted most likely to be a comedian, or I wasn't the one that made the class laugh. That was not my role. But something happened when I met Paul, and I discovered meeting Paul Carrington did two things to me. One, he made me realize that I could be entertaining on the radio. And two, he made me realize that music, unless you're doing a music specialist show, the music is a real secondary concern for you. And certainly in today's radio, with the huge groups running radio and the focus groups and the music research that goes on, for most presenters who you listen to on commercial radio, the music, they'll talk great things about the music and say everything is fantastic, but the music is very secondary to them. It's not, because they're not choosing it. It might be their favorite song and they'll say that, but they don't get to choose it. They don't get to craft it in the same way that I did when I was first starting out in my radio career. But what Paul taught me was that you didn't have to think about the music, that the personality was this incredible thing, and the personality would take you through. And that was the other realization, was that, okay, I can do something with this. I could do something with this gift of radio with my personality, or a personality I'm going to construct. So Paul was doing a late night show in Stoke-on-Trent. I developed some characters with him. None of them particularly PC now. And the show morphed, and I was instrumental in this. I morphed the show, or helped to morph the show, from being the Beano on the radio to being like Viz on the radio. And a lot of the stuff that we did, we thought was hysterical at the time, but now I don't even want to kind of give you examples, because really it wouldn't even get anywhere near the radio now. but we thought it was hysterical and it made us laugh like drains. And if you speak to people who lived in and around that area in kind of the late 80s, early 90s, the Late Night Funster Show was the radio show. And, you know, we tripled the audience in the first 6 months. It was stupid, the audience for that. And I went from there and I got my first presenting gig. And this was another one of the big lessons for me. I became a presenter in North Wales at a station called MFM, which is now Heart North Wales. So it was MFM and Marcher was what I was going to be doing, the late night show, so between 10 and 2. And what I tried to do was just recreate the Funster show that I'd been a part of. And I realised you can't. That it doesn't work like that. You can't go on. So if your favourite presenter is Chris Evans, you're not going to be Chris Evans. You can't be Chris Evans. So you need to try and find your own voice. And it took me a long time for me to find my own voice. And I think part of that was down to the fact that I wasn't as aware as I probably should have been. I wasn't as aware as I could have been about a radio persona. You know, the only thing I knew was we go on the radio and we say funny things and we write jokes and we write sketches, and that's it. So I didn't know about Snoop sessions. I didn't know about listening back and critiquing. I just ploughed on with it. And ultimately that caught up with me. Several years down the line, I got away with it for a fair amount of time. So I was 4 years at MFM, by far and away my longest job in one place up until that point. Never mind radio job, just my longest job, doing 4 years. And then I got a job in Bournemouth doing a breakfast show on 2CR FM. Now, the guy that had been doing breakfast for years, a guy called Graham Mack, who is a legend of radio. And that was a problem for me because I was taking over his breakfast show. And as you know, when a big breakfast show finishes, certainly on a local level, the next guy that comes in to do it doesn't really get it right, because they're just the audience is painfully aware that they aren't the previous star of the breakfast show that they grew and loved over the however long they were on. So I came in, and in the end I did the show for 6 months. But again, there was a couple of incidences which kind of changed me as a radio presenter and as a person. And on my last day, which I don't think we even announced it was my last day, on my last day, somebody called up and asked, "Where's Graham Mack?" It's like he left 6 months ago. But 3 months in, the boss brought in a guy that he'd seen do stand-up, and he thought he'd be really good presenting the breakfast show. And that was Christian O'Connell. And I'm very grateful of the fact that Christian is a good mate of mine. And obviously he's only in the past few weeks really left Absolute Radio and gone off and he's doing the breakfast show on Gold 104.3 in Melbourne, and sounding great. If you get the chance, have a listen to the podcast. It's brilliant. So went from Bournemouth, and everything that happened at Bournemouth, the boss and myself didn't see eye to eye. He wanted a certain thing from his breakfast show, and it wasn't me. And I took that very badly, and it made me leave radio. So I left radio for a couple of years and actually went into banking, and did that for a while. And then in 2001, I kind of came back into radio in the production, and that's when I moved to Birmingham. And Birmingham is my home now. I've lived here for 17 years, produced Galaxy Breakfast Show, then produced and launched Heart Breakfast with Ed James, which is now Heart Breakfast with Ed and Gemma, and did that. And then in 2007, I got a call off a lady called Sue Owen, who, former news editor at Heart, was now the editor of BBC Radio Stoke in Staffordshire and South Cheshire. And she said, I need a breakfast show presenter. Would you be interested? Your name's been kind of pushed my way. So I met, we did some trials, and she was like, yeah, we'll have you. So that was it. That was my journey with the BBC. And over the past 10, 11 years, I've done breakfast on BBC Stoke, BBC WM, and I did an awful lot of shows on BBC Coventry and Warwickshire. Also in that time, I did some Saturday nights on BBC 5 Live. I've worked on BBC Oxford. The beauty about the BBC is that you just take the work as and when you can find it, which is lovely, and that is something I will recommend. If you don't have a tie to a certain place, it's a little bit different now. I've got a family, and my wife and I live in Birmingham, but when you're younger and you don't have those ties, go where the work is and travel to those places. You know, if you live in Bournemouth and a job comes up in Perth in Scotland and it feels right, then absolutely take it, because you've got nothing to tether you, nothing to tie you down. So you're in that position where you can go and really get your teeth into your radio career. And you'll know quickly if it doesn't work out. It doesn't work out, never mind, back you come. You know, and it isn't, you're not stepping off the abyss into nothingness. You're just taking a big step down. So you might kind of injure yourself a little bit to keep that analogy going, but it isn't going to be the end of you at all. As Callum says, if you're tuning in, do let us know where you're tuning in from. If you've got any questions, do feel free to post them, whether it's about radio in general, or it's about podcasting, which is my new passion. I say new passion, this is the thing. About 10 years ago, at least, I realised the BBC were podcasting an awful lot of their programmes. So I started listening to them. And I started with the Danny Baker Show. That was my first podcast. And at the time, I had an iPhone, which I've still got now. So I went onto the podcast thing and just started filling up on them and getting different podcasts and listening. And the thing that intrigued me, the thing that made me realise what amazing things podcasts are, was the fact that I could listen to people who I was a fan of, either as a broadcaster or in some other walk of life, just talking or being in conversation. So, like, I'm a big fan of magic. I do like card magic and things like that. Nothing, by no means professional. It's just something that's a bit of a hobby of mine and something I enjoy. So, two of the people that I really like are Penn and Teller. The American magicians. Teller is the one that doesn't speak, and Penn is the really tall guy. Penn did a podcast at the time called Penn's Sunday Service. It's about an hour long, and it was just him kind of ranting about different things, and it was wonderful. And that kind of sparked to me again of, my goodness, this is, in some ways, it's bigger than radio, and I never thought anything could be like that. I'm going to say hi to Jeff and hi to Oliver. Hello. And thanks very much to Callum for keeping up, because I don't know if I presume the comments are loading in, but I can't be sure. So by all means, just put test or something, just so I know, they're all coming in, because that's the other thing. Whether you like it or not, if you're a presenter on a radio, and it doesn't matter at which level, whether it's hospital radio, whether it's a restricted service license, community radio, university radio, local, regional, national, whatever, you have an ego. You have an ego that needs to be fed in some way. And if you go in, no, I don't have an ego. You do. I denied it for years, but I know it's the case. You can't, it's almost impossible to be on the radio and not have an ego. Podcasts then, which are the next thing along, and the big difference between podcasts and radio is the music aspect, because any music that you use in a podcast has to be copyrighted. You can go to PRS and apply for a copyright license for your podcasts, but they are, for my money, in my opinion, they are not worth the investment when there's some excellent copyright-free music that's out there at the moment, and some really good sites. So podcasts are predominantly speech-based, and whatever you think of, whichever subject, whichever topic you can come up with, there will be a podcast for it. It is, I do two at the moment. So I do one on our dogs called the Puppy Podcast, and I'm just about to launch my second one, which is about mental health, called the 3 a.m. Brain. And that's just two. But when I first started doing the Puppy Podcast, which is the beginning of last year, I was one of about 7 or 8 dog-based podcasts that were out there. Now there's about 20 odd that are out there. And for those people that are thinking, podcasts they're a fad, they're a passing thing, or they're only a tiny thing, there is somewhere between 15 and 20 million regular podcast listeners in the UK alone. America is a huge podcast community. Australia is really coming on strong. South Africa is becoming a big podcasting community. And now the numbers are getting into the billions, which is just incredible, that amount of people will listen to a podcast. I'm always amazed with my podcast, and it really is the Puppy Podcast. It's a little podcast. It's just me talking about our 2 dogs. It's about 20 minutes. If we have an interview in there, it takes it nearer 30 minutes. And we get somewhere between 350 and 400 downloads per episode. Now, the difference with radio is when you get listening figures on radio, that is for a perceived moment in time. It's for that quarter, or for that 6 months, or for that year. With podcasts, it's per episode, and the numbers can change because there's people discovering those new episodes all the time. So my first episode, the first episode of the Puppy Podcast, initially in the first week, I think got 34 downloads, which I was absolutely cock-a-hoop about. Now it's had 1,300 downloads in 18 months. So 1,300 different people, they're all unique downloads. 1,300 people have clicked on that and listened to the first episode. But my advice when it comes to podcasting is very, very simple. Get started. You can make a podcast using one of these and your laptop. They are incredibly easy to do. Radio shows can be uploaded as a podcast. You just have to chop out all the music. You can have a few seconds so it's comfortable with you kind of going into a record and then it fading, but it can't, in no way can the music be long enough to be enjoyed. So really all the podcast would have to just be the links. And the way of getting people to take notice of a podcast, the marketing of a podcast, there's many ways of doing it, but social media is going to be your biggest friend. You get a Facebook page for that podcast, you get an Instagram account for that podcast, and you get a Twitter account for that podcast. And what you do is you get yourself a social media scheduler, so like Hootsuite, or I use Buffer. And in the early days, I was posting on all 3 of those platforms 3 times a day. I did some Facebook marketing as well, bought a Facebook ad, just telling people about the Puppy Podcast, and then just kind of word of mouth. So we've cracked, I think, unique downloads for the Puppy Podcast now. This is over 18 months. We've cracked 30,000 now. I could market it more. I could go bigger with the marketing, but it's not my main focus. The business, my clients who I'm making podcasts for, they are the main focus. And this thing about the dogs is, it's there and it's nice. If I had more time on my hands, I'd probably market it more. I'd probably get sponsors on board. I'd go local sponsors, maybe get in touch with a local pet store, speak to them, just ask them to maybe give us a prize to give away. The difficulty is, and this is something else with podcasts, is they're global. My biggest audience for my puppy podcast is North America. I get listeners in the UK, but North America are the main audience for the puppy podcast, which I just find absolutely incredible. But yes, if you're going to do a podcast, just get started. Start doing it. Start recording it. Record it on your phone. There's a great app called Anchor, which can help you make your own podcast and publish it for you. And if you want any more advice about where to go for podcasting things, whether it's hosting or directories or equipment even, then you can always email me. A little bit of a plug. You can always email me, pete@monkeypantsproductions.co.uk. Let's go have a drink. Oliver says, I've liked what Pete has done in radio for many years. Well, thank you very much, Oliver. And now he used to produce Ed James. Working on the BBC was me at my best as a presenter, because I realised that I should just be myself. So I am myself. I'm obviously an enlarged, almost a caricature of the actual person I am. I'm not like this all the time at home like I am on the radio, because that is ridiculous. I wouldn't last a week with my wife. That would be absolutely awful. But you need to be true. You need to be yourself on the radio. So don't say you like a TV program if you don't like it. If you really don't like it, think of something constructive or funny to say about it. If you're just going to be nasty about things, don't bother. Because negativity doesn't work on the radio. Funny negativity, funny, constructive, beautifully observed, witty negativity does, but just you going on the radio and going, oh, do you see Love Island? I can't stand it. I don't understand it. That does nothing. Nobody likes listening to that. Nobody enjoys listening to that. For instance, one of the big for instance is, I'm no fan of Bob Dylan. I get that other people are. I get that I'm kind of not the Bob Dylan side of the fence. There are millions of, I was going to say I'm in the minority, but I'm not sure I am. I think I'm in the majority. But instead of me going, God, I hate Bob Dylan, I did a talkie one day on, I'm going to be honest, I don't get Bob Dylan. I don't get what the fuss is about. Who don't you get? And I was very good about saying, clearly he's talented. Clearly this man knows what he's doing. He is a musical genius. Who am I to dictate whether or not he's not? I'm just saying, from my point of view, don't get it. And the lines absolutely lit up, because people wanted to agree with you. People wanted to disagree with you. People wanted to tell you, oh, yeah, I've never liked someone, I've never liked Ant and Dec, or I didn't keep it necessarily to music. I've never liked Coronation Street or whatever. And it just went on like that. If you've got the chance, if you're doing something in any way speech-based, get the listeners involved, because the listeners will come up with stories that are weirder, more memorable, and funnier than anything you could possibly write. And that's not doing you down as writers. That is just the truth. Real life is funnier and more stranger than anything we could ever construct. Working with Ed James, I'm going to talk about that for a second. I did it for 6 years. We launched the show. I was very new to being a radio producer. And what I've said to Ed is, for my money, Ed is probably the best commercial breakfast show presenter outside of London. In fact, probably, I'm going to take London into account as well. I think he is amazing. I can't say enough good stuff about how this guy presents a radio show. he is so focused. He's so on it. If you're not following him on social media, then you really should, because he's always just commenting little things here and there that make you think or make you want to respond or, you know, make you want to like him. And he's like that in real life. He really is. Again, it's the construct isn't quite as big, but he's a big character and just the loveliest man. And you know, I love the fact that I can call him a friend. But working with him was testing at times. He'd never had a kind of a producer before. He'd had someone that helped him out and come up with songs and did production, but he'd never had anyone that went, no, you can't do that. Or, well, you can do it, but you've only got 90 seconds to do it in because we've got to stick to time. So we clashed, you know, we didn't agree on various things. And that's the relationship between the presenter and the producer is an odd one, because you've got to be mates. You've got to get on. If the producer and the presenter don't get on, oh my goodness, what an uphill battle that is. But you've got to be mates. You've got to get on, but you've got to understand that it's a working relationship. It's fine. Ed and I many times got to a Thursday, finished the show at 10. We'd be in some bar at midday and we'd be there until the early hours of Friday morning. But the relationship was based on the fact that we respected each other's decisions and motives. And when I said to him, oh, we can't do that, I haven't got the time. You haven't got the time in the hour to do that. It wasn't because I was wanting to make him sound bad. It was because I wanted to make him sound good. So I'm telling him, this is the time you've got to work with. So yeah, I can't believe it's been half an hour already. If there's any more questions, by all means, I'll give it another few seconds as we're wrapping up. If there is any more questions, but if there's any more questions afterwards, you can get me on Facebook Messenger through Facebook, or you can, as I say, email me, Pete at Monkey Pants Productions, which is the name of my company now, .co.uk, Pete at monkeypantsproductions.co.uk. So now I've not been doing a regular radio show for about a year and a half, and I make podcasts for businesses. I do public speaking training, I do media training, and it's tough because I'm running my own business, which I've never done before. I've been used to having everything done for me. But yeah, we're building up a nice business, and it's lovely to still kind of do things like this. I'm still in touch with the guys in radio, and you know, the door by no means is closed to any radio shows, and still get asked to do little bits of cover here and there. But the business is kind of my main thing at the moment. Listen to podcasts. Start looking at podcasts a little bit more, and maybe do your own, maybe look at turning your own show into a podcast. But, you know, just kind of, if it's all about the music, then that's not going to work as a podcast. But your personality could make a really good podcast. So do check it out. Get into podcasting. It is the future of broadcasting. There will always be radio. It will always exist because it's such a great direct way of communicating. But podcasting is going to be a really good younger brother or sister to radio in the years to come. And it's just getting bigger and bigger and bigger, podcasting. So I can't recommend it enough as a place to look at and as a place to go forward. The best place to host a podcast, I host mine on a website called Libsyn, libsyn.com. It is something you have to pay for, but I think the lowest plan is $5 a month, which is probably, I think it's about £3 or £4. You can host on SoundCloud, but that isn't something that I would necessarily do. I'm just no fan of SoundCloud. That's just my personal opinion. And if you're looking for somewhere free to host your podcast, then probably Audio Boom is probably your best bet. That's really good. The only thing I can't remember off the top of my head is whether or not Audio Boom can get you onto iTunes without becoming a paid subscriber to Audio Boom. That's the only thing I'm not sure of. Yeah, Audio Boom or Libsyn are my two favourites, but you've got loads of others out there. Acast is another good one. Buzzsprout is another good hosting site. And as Callum said, podcasts, they're like catch-up TV. They're like your own personal radio station for whatever subject you want to listen to. And for me, just very quickly, finally, the BBC have done a podcast recently of the Grenfell inquiry. So, I mean, a tragic event. But what the BBC have done, it's a 20-minute daily podcast, on Monday to Friday podcast, when the Grenfell inquiry is ongoing. So the reporter that goes to the inquiry then does the podcast talking about what's gone on in the inquiry that day and playing little audio clips and things like that. 20 minutes of that, there isn't a station in the country that would have that in prime time listening. They just wouldn't have it. But it's been made and been invested in, so it is there for everyone to listen to. There is no exclusion in podcasting. Everyone can listen to everything. Now, I think that's going to potentially change over the next few months and years, and I think kind of really good subscription podcasts are going to start coming in, and you're going to have to start paying for them. But as it stands at the moment, and the Grenfell Inquiry podcast for me is one of the best uses of podcasting that I've heard in an awfully long time, because it is something that people are going to be interested in, but not something that in that form of 20 minutes you would want to hear on primetime radio. But it is still available to everyone. Okay. Thank you so much for being kind enough, if you've checked in on this at any time or you're watching this in the future. My name has been Pete Morgan. As I say, you can find me on Facebook, and by all means, we can connect on there. You can message me through Facebook if you've got any questions, or you can always send me an email, pete@monkeypantsproductions.co.uk. Have yourself a great evening. Stay cool, stay hydrated, everybody.